Regardless of if you got a win or if you lost in week 2 of fantasy football, the waiver wire is where you get an advantage over all of your league mates. So you need to make sure you get the right players off of it. And that is exactly what this video is going to do for you. I'll cover all of your bases, starting out with a quick list of players that are your number one priority, regardless of what league size you're in. You're going to want Cam Scatterboo, looking to give Tyron Tracy problems for the RB1 role. Drake May as well as the quarterback one. Quinshot Judkins is getting a good amount of usage now in his first game. It's a very good sign for him. Brenton Strange, Trey Benson, Harold Fannin, Juwan Johnson as well. Zach Ertz, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Tootin, and Keenan Allen. Those are going to be your number one options, and if you don't have them, Alec Iomanor is going to be our number one waiver wire ad. In week 1, he showed a very, very strong sign. He had 79% of the snaps, being top 2 in targets and routes run. And then we come into week 2, it's not a fluke. He is here to stay, playing 48 of the total 66 snaps in his second ever game, I might add to that, leading him to finish with a higher total target share than Calvin Ridley in their total routes run, and clearly ahead of Tyler Lockett, DK Van Jefferson, everybody else in this wide receiver depth chart. And you can tell just by watching these games, Cam Ward is building a real connection with him. Last week, I know we all saw Cam Ward throw across his body for a crazy touchdown to Alec Iomanor. That's usually not supposed to happen. Coaches say not to do that. He did it. It shows their connection. And now they're coming into a matchup in week 3 against the Colts. They just allowed the Broncos to go for 41.4 fantasy points to all of the wide receivers there, with Colton Sutton, with everybody else in Troy Franklin, who I may or may not be talking about later in this video. You got to get these guys while you still can. And make sure, guys, to hit that like button and be subscribed if you want to see this waiver wire video come to you every single week, and a bunch of live streams on this channel as well. But Cedric Tillman, still rostered in less than 40% of leagues. I don't understand that. Collectively, we need to be rostering him. Joe Flacco starting the quarterback. I'll make it simple. You start this man. If you look at the starts of Cedric Tillman last year with Jameis Winston, and we can compare these two quarterbacks because when they're both starting as the number one, they're top 5 in passing attempts. He averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game and played over 90% of the snaps, averaging 10 targets per game in that stretch. It's not an accident that he is the number one wide receiver. And you look at this week, he kind of is. 69 total snaps in this offense compared to Jerry Jeudy at 64. Even in routes run, he had 48 compared to Jerry Jeudy at 45, leading him to finish with 10.2 total fantasy points. It was a terrible blowout against the Ravens, all things considered, but his fantasy day did relatively get saved by a touchdown. You cannot ignore that fact. But the underlying numbers here are proving that he's actually being used and a top wide receiver in this offense you want. As long as Joe Flacco is the starting quarterback, he's going to be number one in passing attempts. He is already, and that's going to keep these wide receivers very fantasy viable. But please, go spend a good amount of your fab on Troy Franklin if he's available to you, and I'll lay it out very cleanly for you. 24 fantasy points, that looks great from week 2. We are more worried about the actual numbers and the underlying usage that he had on this channel. If you've been here for long enough, you know that. You look into this. He led all receivers in playing time, 44 of the total 45 snaps in 3 wide receiver sets. And you go even deeper, he played 5 of the 6 total snaps in 2 wide receiver sets. It's literally him and Colton Sutton, because he also led in routes and targets with 9. That's a 32.1% team target share. For context, Malik Neighbors had a 35% target share last year. He was the wide receiver 1 in that. Not saying that this is going to continue, but it's definitely a good sign for Troy Franklin because the Broncos offense is good, and they just traded away second-year wide receiver in Devon Vele before the season started to make room for Troy Franklin in the slot, and that is exactly what we're seeing. Again, clear top wide receiver in 3 wide receiver sets, 2 wide receiver sets, and Bo Nix even played with him in college when they were both at Oregon. 2 seasons, over 2,000 yards receiving for him. It's all good. This is why everybody was hyping up Garrett Wilson and Justin Fields from their connection at Ohio State. And a guy that does play on Monday, probably as you're watching this video or even after, is going to be Dalton Schultz. He does get a decent matchup here, but the bottom line for week 3 is that we don't have Cade Stover. He is the clear tight end 1 because he's dealing with a foot injury. And if we look in week 1, CJ Stroud targeted the tight ends on 33% of his dropbacks. Now the entire target share just goes to him because there's nobody else running routes in this tight end position for him. We'll see what he does this week in week 2 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But Schultz is going to be viable for fantasy football because of the fact this offensive line looks terrible. The running game honestly looks really bad too. So they have no choice but for the intermediate and short game to thrive. And that is exactly why everybody says a tight end is the quarterback safety blanket, for the exact reasons like that. And when you're running all of the routes as the tight end 1, it's a guy that we want. But you cannot underestimate Wan'Dale Robinson and what we just witnessed against the Cowboys. Now, we do have to be fair. I will get into everything here. 28.2 fantasy points. Amazing. Caught 8 of his 10 targets for 142 yards and a touchdown. We do have to be realistic. This game went into overtime. Russell Wilson did have 41 passing attempts and looked like prime Russ at times. That's always not going to happen in these games. But what will happen is the Giants in negative game scripts and having to pass. You look at their upcoming schedule, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Colts, the Eagles twice, and the Broncos. Like, I could keep going down their entire schedule. There's a real chance they win 3 games, if that, on the season. They have such a bad schedule, meaning they have to pass. So when you have that, and when you look at the difference in snap share between these wide receivers, Wan'Dale Robinson actually had the least amount of snaps compared to Malik Neighbors and Darius Slayton. I'm not worried about Darius Slayton. He had 66 total snaps, ran every single route in this offense, and came away with 2 targets. That's horrid. That is terrible. Wan'Dale Robinson played 47 of the 66 snaps. A lot of that I attribute to him being questionable coming into this week because he had a lower snap share than in week 1. There's really nothing you need to worry about that. But Wan'Dale Robinson is getting played in the 2 wide receiver sets, obviously the 3 wide receiver sets. And if he's on your waiver wire, he's a guy that you need to be adding. He's historically been a low ADOT kind of guy. Great in targets. He was the wide receiver 6 in target share in slot rate last year, and wide receiver 19 in targets per game at 8.1. But he was still only the wide receiver 36 because he just didn't get outside the numbers and have these deep balls like we saw. But regardless, in week 2, we kind of saw that. Like, he was lined up outside the slot a little bit more than he was before. Obviously, he had that very deep touchdown, and he has the ability and talent to do it. 14.2 yards per target. That's one of his highest, I believe, in any game he's ever played where he's had a decent amount of targets. Will Wilson be passing 450 yards a game? No, but I think he can be viable enough to be a fantasy ad. And very quickly, some defenses for us, guys. If the Falcons are out there, go grab them, getting a matchup against the Carolina Panthers. For some reason, the Packers are on the waiver wire in over 50% of leagues. They're probably the best defense, one of the best defense, next to the Broncos, of course. Now Patrick Surtain is injured. That's a whole other story. They get the Browns in week 3. They should not be available. Make them your number 1 ad. I would honestly be okay with putting your priority on the Packers defense. Then you get the Buccaneers versus the Jets, who probably won't have Justin Fields in concussion protocol. But that's going to finish out this video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around in this one. I will see you in the waiver wire video next week and on the live streams coming soon as well.